The rain had turned the whole alley into a dark river by 11. I was hurrying through it, the cold water soaking my shoes, my ankles. My apartment door was just 100 feet away, but the feeling I wasn't alone had followed me for 6 blocks. I turned my head just enough. A shadow shifted against the wet brick behind me. A cold knot twisted in my gut and squeezed the air right out of my lungs. I picked up my pace. My breath came in short, white puffs. And then another shadow detached itself from a doorway ahead, right under my fire escape. My heart hammered against my palm where I'd pressed my fist to my chest. The man stepped into the dim light from a distant street lamp. Matteo Rossi. He was tall, imposing. His sharp eyes watched me come closer. Water dripped from the dark brim of his hat. His presence was a different kind of threat, one I understood even less. I wanted to run, but the follower at my back closed that option. I had to walk right toward him. I stopped a few feet away. I could smell the wet wool of his coat. Behind me, boots scraped on wet concrete. The shadow was closer. Pure, cold panic washed over me. I just reached out and grabbed his arm through his sleeve. My fingers sank into solid muscle. "Please," I said, my voice shaking, "just walk with me." He looked down at my hand on his arm, then at my face. His own hand came up not to remove mine but to cover it. His palm was warm, completely dry. He gave one slow nod. We took a step together toward the alley's mouth. And that's when the follower stepped into the open. A gaunt man with hollow cheeks, his clothes soaked through. He blocked our path completely. Matteo's hand squeezed mine once. A quick press. Then he let go. He shifted his weight in front of me, his broad back becoming a wall. His right hand, the one with the silver lion ring, slid into his coat pocket. He never took his eyes off the threat. I stayed behind him. It was the only safe place left. The icy grip of Victor's stare was still tight around my ribs, a phantom pressure I couldn't shake. I fumbled my keys in the lobby's sickly yellow light. My fingers trembled against the cold brass. The silence between Matteo and me was thick. It smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner. He stood a few feet away, posture straight, hands loose at his sides. He watched the glass doors without seeming to look at anything. I finally got the key in the lock. It turned with a loud, grinding click. I pushed the heavy door open and held it. He moved past me into the stairwell. His shoulder didn't brush mine. The air was cooler there. Still, it carried the faint scent of concrete dust. I started up the steps to the 3rd floor. He followed a single step behind me, a solid shadow at my back. I could hear the soft sound of his shoes on the tile. I could hear my own unsteady breathing. My legs felt weak. Strange. I gripped the painted metal railing. My damp palm slid a little on the cool surface. We climbed a full flight without speaking, just our footsteps and the distant hum of a boiler. I tried to make my body stop shaking. It wouldn't listen. On the 2nd floor landing, I had to stop. I leaned against the wall, my breath coming in short pulls. He stood on the step below me. That put our eyes almost level in the dim light from the single bulb. He wasn't checking the exit. He wasn't on his phone. He was looking at me. His face was all clean angles and control. But his eyes, they held a different quality. Focused, but the intensity was gone. For just a second, he just looked tired. A deep, worn-out kind of tired. It wasn't the face of a man who just won a fight. It was the face of a man who'd done a job. The look vanished as soon as I saw it. His expression smoothed back into that neutral mask. He didn't ask if I was okay. "Men like that don't learn," he said. His voice was low. It wasn't gentle. It was a simple fact. "They only stop." He said it without looking away from me. I heard the meaning. The violence wasn't a lesson. It was a removal. The only solution his world allowed. His honesty was more frightening than any lie. He had meant to end the threat, not teach it a lesson. I felt a confusing pull in my chest, an ache for the man who saw things that clearly, and a revulsion for what that clarity cost. He moved up onto the landing with me. We were close now in the narrow space. The sleeve of his dark coat was inches from my arm. I could feel the warmth coming off him in the cool air. He didn't touch me. I didn't step back. The weight of what he'd just done hung between us. The weight of what he'd just said. My heart beat a hard rhythm against my breastbone. I wanted to ask him why. I wanted to ask what happened to Victor. The words stuck in my dry throat. He looked down at my face. His gaze touched the scar above my eyebrow. It dropped to my mouth. For a long moment, neither of us moved or spoke. The almost of something passed through the air like a current. Then he turned his head toward the stairs going up. The moment broke. He took a small step back to let me go first. The tremor in my hands was so bad I had to press my palms flat against the cold stairwell wall. I tried to focus on the grain of the wood to stop the shaking. The hallway outside my apartment smelled like lemony floor cleaner and old wood. A slice of normalcy that felt miles away. Mateo moved ahead of me with a quiet purpose that made my breath catch. His steps were silent. He scanned every closed door we passed. Then I saw the man slumped against my doorframe. A stranger in a dark suit sat on the floor, his head bowed. His left arm was bent at a wrong angle. Mateo stopped walking and put a hand out to block me. I noticed his other hand went to his coat pocket, not the gun at his hip. The man on the floor lifted his head. His face was a mess of bruises and fresh blood. "Rossi," he rasped. "Silas," Mateo said. His voice was low and clear. A large man leaning against the wall nearby pushed himself off with a nod. Mateo's enforcer. "Silas." Mateo looked at the bleeding messenger. "You tell Victor Crane his business ends at Ashland Avenue. He sends another messenger, I send back pieces." The man on the floor flinched. Mateo's jaw was tight, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He looked more tired than angry, and in that tiredness I felt a strange, cold ache for him. It was gone before I could understand it. Silas hauled the messenger to his feet. The man cried out as his broken arm was jostled. They moved down the hallway toward the service elevator. I was frozen in my own doorway, my keys a cold weight in my hand. Mateo turned to me only after they were gone. He did not speak. His eyes locked onto mine with a finality that squeezed the air from my lungs. The message was plain. I had seen it. I was part of it now. Across the street, a car idled at the curb. The dark window on the passenger side began to roll up. "Real quick, if you're here for the tension and the secrets, hit subscribe. Trust me, we're just getting started." The car idling across the street. I'd been wrong to ignore it this long. My stomach twisted into a tighter knot with every block we drove away from my home. The armored SUV smelled like new leather, so thick and sterile it coated the back of my throat. The silent driver behind the dark partition didn't look back. I pressed my hands against the cool, tinted window. The city blurred into streaks of light I couldn't reach. My voice sounded small and thin in the sealed space. "Where are you taking me?" Mateo sat beside me, his gaze fixed forward. "Somewhere secure." "I want to go home." Panic made my breath come fast and shallow. I reached for the door handle. It was a solid piece of metal with no visible latch. My fingers scrambled over its smooth surface and found nothing. I turned to him, my chest tight. "You can't just kidnap me." He moved then, a swift shift of his body that blocked my view of the door. He clasped my hands in his. His fingers were warm and steady. His grip was firm but not painful. I saw the faint white line of a scar across his own knuckles. He held my hands in his lap. His thumb pressed once, briefly, against my wrist before he let go. "The man who saw your face works for Victor Crane," he said. His voice was low and final. "My code demands I contain the threat he now represents." "You are that threat. The car won't stop. The doors won't open. Decide if the rest of this ride will be comfortable or not." I stopped pulling at the door. A cold clarity washed through my fear. He watched me accept it, his eyes dark in the passing streetlights. I looked down at my own hands in my lap. My thumb traced the small, raised line above my eyebrow, my old scar. It was a nervous habit from childhood. His gaze followed the motion, and his expression shifted. Something in his eyes softened for a single, startling second. Then he reached into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out a silver cigarette case, an old-fashioned kind. He opened it, and I saw a single photo tucked inside the lid, a black-and-white picture of a young woman. She had a small, distinct scar above her eyebrow, something locked in my chest, refusing to move. He snapped the case shut before I could speak, his face a closed door once more. Why he carried a picture of me with my scar? I wasn't going to like the answer. The ghost of the SUV's vinyl seatbelt still dug like a cold strap across my collarbone. My new cage was this leather armchair. It smelled of old polish and cigars. Mateo had left me there with a glass of water and a silent guard by the door. He moved to the far window and stood with his back to me. The only sound was the low hum of the city, through thick glass. I watched his reflection in the dark pane. He wasn't watching the street below. He was perfectly still, looking at nothing. After a long time, he turned away from the window. He walked to the other side of the room and stopped before a large portrait. A severe-looking man and woman with 2 young boys. Mateo stood before that family portrait for several minutes. He didn't move a single muscle. His shoulders lost their usual rigid line. This wasn't the posture of a man in command. This was the posture of a man carrying a great weight. I felt a strange pull in my chest, an unwanted ache for him. I spoke without thinking. My voice was soft in the quiet room. They look formidable. Mateo didn't turn. He answered to the painting. A cage is still a cage, even if it's gilded. His words were flat and tired. They held a truth he hadn't meant to give me. I saw the crack then. It was in the slight drop of his head, the way his fingers flexed once at his side. This was the man from the stairs, not the one from the car. The revelation tightened my throat. I got up from the chair. The leather let out this soft sigh. I took a few steps toward him and stopped a few feet away. I could see the fine weave of his suit jacket, the dark hair at his nape. The air between us felt charged. Warm. He had to have heard me, but he didn't turn. He didn't close the distance, and I didn't either. We just stood there, separated by a space full of things we couldn't say. Then his posture shifted. The weight lifted, replaced by that familiar tension. He turned to face me, and his eyes were cool again, detached. "Your curiosity is a liability, Clara," he said. His voice was flat. "But it's also the only thing keeping you from being a mere asset." He looked past me toward the door. "The car outside belongs to a friend. It will make sure no one else approaches you tonight." Then he just walked away, leaving me alone with the portrait and the heavy scent of polished leather. Everything else I could handle. But why the car outside belonged to a friend? That was different. The chill from his words still clung to my shoulders like a shroud. I settled onto the cold, buttery leather of the sofa. The lemony, polished smell was sharp in the air. Mateo stood by the wall of windows, staring down at the city lights. His silence was a wall I had to climb. I took a steadying breath that did absolutely nothing. "Am I a guest?" I asked, my voice firmer than I felt, "or a prisoner? The terms matter." He turned from the window. The city glow outlined his frame. He considered me, his face unreadable. Then his phone rang. The sound was harsh in the quiet. He answered it without looking away from me. He listened for a long moment, and his gaze on me changed. It went from assessment to something sharper. I saw his free hand curl into a loose fist at his side. That was the only sign. "Understood," he said into the phone. He ended the call. His eyes held mine. "The Crane account is active. He knows we have her." A cold wave washed through my chest. His world had almost killed me once. It would try again. "What does that mean?" I forced the question out. He didn't answer right away. He looked past me, his focus turned inward. He ran a hand over his mouth. His shoulders dropped just a fraction. It was a crack. A moment of real fatigue. I saw it and I said nothing. I didn't know what to do with his sudden vulnerability. "It means he's willing to spend capital to get you back," he said. His voice was lower now, like he was speaking more to himself. "Why?" He looked back at me, his eyes searching my face. He studied the scar above my brow. His own gaze softened, just for a second. Then it was gone. He turned and walked to a side table. He opened a drawer. He pulled out a small, worn photograph and held it out to me without a word. I took it. My fingers trembled. The photo was of me taken years ago, my face right after the accident that caused the scar. And someone had drawn a careful, precise circle around the mark. The paper was worn soft at the edges from handling. I looked from the photo to Mateo. My throat closed up. He had carried this. He had studied it. The reason was clear, and it had nothing to do with threats. I moved toward the door, and why he'd circled my scar in that old photograph moved right along with me. The chill of his stare still prickled the back of my neck. I found myself standing in the dim hallway, late afternoon light catching motes of dust above the scuffed baseboard. I needed water, or just an excuse to move. The silence felt heavier than any lock. I walked toward the kitchen, my socks whispering on the wood floor. I stopped just before the doorway because I heard voices. Silas, Mateo's driver, was speaking. His tone was low, rushed. I pressed my back against the cool hallway wall. I held my breath. Silas said the man who followed me was just a tech hound for Crane. He said the guy had one job, to get a keychain drive from my office. I felt a jolt. I remembered it, the promotional USB drive from a conference. It was still in my bag. Mateo's voice cut in, tight with frustration. Why would a low-yield item get a high-priority retrieval order? Silas didn't have an answer. I heard the sound of a palm slapping a countertop. Hard, Mateo said, so she's a liability who's holding an asset. Perfect. His words were a cold splash of clarity. My fear twisted into a sharp point of understanding. They weren't after me. They were after a piece of plastic I owned. That drive was my way out. I needed to get to my bag before they did. I eased away from the wall. I took a careful step back down the hall. A floorboard groaned under my foot. The conversation in the kitchen stopped dead. I saw Mateo's shadow stretch across the hallway floor from the kitchen doorway. I forced my body to keep moving toward the stairs. I made my steps sound purposeful, not panicked. I didn't look back. The rest made sense. Why Mateo's shadow froze before it reached the floor? That part didn't. My throat still ached from holding my breath. I stood in the study's doorway now, my shoulder leaning against the cool wood frame. The drive was the target. That simple piece of plastic made sense of everything, and nothing at all. Mateo stood across the room by the fireplace, his back to me. He was examining something in his hands, his head bowed. The firelight caught the edge of his profile, and I saw his lips were pressed into a thin, hard line. He looked less like a predator then, more like a man carrying a weight. The cash, the gun, the scars, none of it was normal. Yet in that silent study, his quiet burden felt like the only real thing. I took a step into the room. The floorboard creaked. Mateo turned. It was a fluid, immediate movement. He didn't seem surprised. He held up the object in his hands. It was that old photograph of me from the file. "You heard," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. My pulse was a quick drumbeat in my neck. He looked from the photo to my face. His eyes traced the real scar above my brow. "This mark," he said, his voice low. "It makes you easy to identify." He walked to his desk and laid the photo down. He picked up a pen. My breath caught. I watched him. He didn't circle the scar this time. Instead, he drew a single, careful line right through my entire image, from head to toe. Then he did the same to his own figure standing beside me in the picture. He looked up. "This is what they will do." His tone was flat, final. He wasn't threatening me. He was showing me a fact. The violence in that simple gesture was a promise. A promise from my world, not his. Cold understanding washed over me. Crane wouldn't just take the drive. He would erase the witness, completely. Mateo was offering the opposite, but protection? Protection demanded its own kind of brutality. I had to choose. Which kind of erasure could I actually live with? I made my decision right then. I walked to the desk. My legs felt steady for the first time that night. I reached into my bag and pulled out the keychain drive. I placed it on the polished wood between us. "Then use it," I said. My voice didn't shake. "Use it to erase him first." The phantom pressure of Victor's grip still ached my bicep. A memory. I blinked against the light. Sterile, white morning light reflecting off a laboratory floor. I found Mateo in a small office off the main lab. He was studying a blueprint on a tablet, his posture rigid. I didn't knock. The low hum of a ventilation system filled the quiet. I stood in the doorway until his eyes lifted to meet mine. They held no surprise. Only a cool assessment. "You heard Sila's," he said. Not a question. His voice was flat. My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice level. "I know about the drive. I took it. I don't know what's on it, but I know Crane wants it." I watched his hands. They were perfectly still on the tablet. Not a single twitch. His knuckles were pale. I noticed a small, old scar on his thumb I'd never seen before. He placed the tablet down on the metal desk. Deliberate, careful. "And what do you propose?" "A deal," I said. The words felt dangerous in my mouth. "My silence, my cooperation. I help you figure out what's on that drive and how to use it. You give me answers. And when it's over, you let me go." He was silent for too long. His gaze fixed on a point past my shoulder. The pause stretched. I saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. He looked away first. A quick glance toward the empty lab. I had no idea what that meant. When he looked back, his expression was unreadable. "You follow my lead," he said. His voice was lower now, almost quiet. "You lie to me once, the deal is void. You revert to being an asset to be managed." He moved then, came around the desk. He stopped a few feet from me, his presence filling the small room. He didn't touch me, but his proximity was its own statement. "The drive," he said. "Where is it?" I took a steadying breath. "My old gym bag, in a zippered pocket. It's at my apartment." I saw the immediate calculation in his eyes. The shift from negotiator to tactician. He would send someone. He would retrieve it right under Crane's nose. It would be a message, a show of force and reach. Protection through absolute demonstration. Whatever came next, whether my gym bag was still where I'd left it, that was the part I hadn't figured out. A metallic taste still coated the back of my tongue, like I'd bitten a coin. The only light in the safe house kitchen came from the humming refrigerator. A dim glow on the scarred laminate counter. I stood there because I was too wired to sleep. Matteo Rossi, the man holding me captive, now my partner in a deal, stood across the room. He was heating something on the stove, his back to me. The silence between us was a living thing. He turned with two plates. He set one in front of me on the counter without a word. Simple pasta with oil and garlic. He had a gun on his hip and blood on his hands. He placed his own plate down a foot away from mine and leaned against the counter. We ate standing up in the quiet dark. The only sounds were our forks on the plates and the steady hum of the old appliance. I watched his profile in the faint light. His movements were efficient, but his eyes were fixed on the middle distance. For the first time, he looked tired, not just dangerous. "Why did you stop that night?" I asked. My voice was too loud in the quiet. He didn't look at me. He finished his bite and set his fork down with a precise click. "It was a message for Crane," he said. His tone was flat. "Stay out of our territory, that's all." I waited. He picked up his fork again but didn't use it. He just turned it over in his fingers. "My family has a rule," he said, his voice lower. "Testimony involuntary witnesses. We create enough ghosts. We don't add civilians to the list if we can avoid it." I understood then. That was his line, not just his family's. He shifted to face me slightly. We were close enough that I could see the faint stubble along his jaw. The refrigerator light caught the gray at his temples. He was looking at me, really looking, and his usual mask was gone. In its place was a raw honesty that made my chest ache. He didn't move closer. I didn't either. The space between us felt charged with everything we weren't saying. I could feel the warmth from his arm next to mine. The air smelled of garlic and old wood. Then he pushed away from the counter. The moment shattered. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice back to that detached, normal tone. He took our plates to the sink and just walked out, leaving me alone in the dim kitchen. The warmth of that almost moment lingered, but I could feel it cooling already. I stood there for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about his code, about the line he would cross. Then I thought about the drive in my pocket, and his laptop on the table, left unlocked when he stepped away to answer his phone earlier. The trust was a fragile new thing. My survival was an old, hard one. I pushed it aside. I told myself I'd think about why his laptop was left open later. The cold metal of the keychain drive felt like it had left a phantom weight in my palm as I staggered into the hallway. And then a blistering wave of heat slammed into my face from the open door of my apartment. It was thick with the smell of melted plastic and charred wood. Flames were licking the ceiling inside my living room. My neighbor's door across the hall was splintered open. I saw my blue gym bag tossed on the floor inside their ruined entryway. My stomach twisted. They'd been looking for the drive. The fire was just a cover. A loud crack came from above me. Plaster rained down from the ceiling. I turned and ran for the emergency stairs. Thick black smoke pooled along the hallway ceiling. It stung my eyes and clawed at my throat. I dropped to my knees and crawled. The floor tiles were hot under my palms. I reached the stairwell door and pulled. It swung open into a wall of gray haze. I could hear the fire roaring below me. The way down was gone. I turned back. The only other exit was the elevator, a total death trap. I pressed my sleeve over my mouth and tried to think. My lungs burned with every shallow breath. The smoke grew thicker and darker by the second. A support beam near my apartment groaned and then snapped. It crashed down across the hallway, blocking my path back completely. I was trapped. Trapped between the fire below and the collapsing hall behind me. I backed against the hot wall. My heart hammered against my ribs. The heat was becoming unbearable. And then a figure moved in the smoke near the broken beam. A man I didn't know stepped over the debris. He was big, dressed in dark work clothes. His eyes locked onto me. This wasn't a firefighter. He was here to confirm the kill. I looked for a weapon. There was nothing. Headlights cut through the smoke outside the window at the hall's end. A car skidded to a halt in the alley below. The man coming for me heard it too. He hesitated for a second. That was all the time Mateo needed. He exploded through the stairwell door I had just closed. Soot streaked his face. His eyes held a raw fury I had never seen before. He didn't look at the other man. He looked only at me. In one motion, he grabbed my arm and yanked me behind him. He shielded my body with his own as the man lunged. Mateo met him with brutal efficiency. There was a sickening crunch. The man fell and did not move. Mateo turned back to me. His hand, when it found mine again, was trembling. But why his hand was trembling? I still had no answer for that. The phantom heat of the flames still prickled across my skin like a relentless sunburn. My back ached from the rigid kitchen chair I'd been perched on for hours. We were in a silent, sterile loft. The only scent was a faint trace of industrial cleaner and dust. I stared at the black grit ground into the lines of my palms. My whole life was now ash in a fireproof safe. Mateo stood across the room, a silhouette against the dark window. He hadn't spoken since Alina left us here. I am taking you to the bus station at dawn, Matteo said. His voice was flat and final. You will get on the first bus going anywhere. You will not look back. His words were a cold blade in the hollow space the fire had left. I made myself stand. My legs felt weak under me. So that's it. You make my life explode, and then you throw me away like garbage. It is the only way to protect you now. He still wouldn't look at me. He examined the empty street below, his shoulders a rigid line. I remembered his unlocked laptop that night, left open on the table after he explained his code. He hadn't chosen me, something else had put us here. There was a difference. He protected witnesses, not partners. You don't get to make that choice for me. My voice cracked. I walked toward him until only a few feet of dusty floorboards separated us. Not after you dragged me into this. Not after you showed me that code. He turned then. The hard light from the bare bulb showed the soot still smudged near his temple. His eyes were not cold. They were full of a weary pain I had never seen in him. He looked at my ruined hands. Without a word, he went to the kitchen sink. He filled a bowl with warm water and grabbed a clean cloth. He came back and knelt on the floor before me. The gesture was so unexpected I stopped breathing. He took my left hand in his. His touch was careful. He dipped the cloth and began to wipe the soot from my skin. The warm water felt shocking. His head was bowed over his work, his movements slow and thorough. I have not felt true fear since I was a boy, he said, his voice low. Not for myself. Tonight, hearing that address on the scanner. His hand stilled, the cloth resting against my wrist. He didn't finish. The admission hung in the air between us. It was a crack in everything. I turned my hand under his, not to pull away, but to briefly clasp his fingers. They were warm. You don't get to quit on me, I whispered. His hand was shaking as he wiped the soot away. I'd been wrong to ignore it this long. The phantom warmth of his hands cleaning mine still lingered against my chilled skin. By dawn's gray light, I was kneeling on the cold hardwood floor. The faint chemical scent of a dry erase marker cut through the stale air. I'd spread the city map across the floorboards. With a careful red marker, I circled each location from the news reports on the burner laptop. Matteo stood in the doorway behind me, his arms crossed over his chest. You are not a soldier, he said. His voice was flat, dismissive. You do not know our patterns. A flush of frustration crept up my neck. I kept my eyes on the map. The fire at my apartment was not random, I said, not looking up. The dock shooting last month wasn't either. I placed a final red circle on the grid. Finally, I lifted my head to meet his skeptical gaze. Every violent incident attributed to Crane is within 2 blocks of a city outreach center. Look for yourself. He was silent for a long moment. Then he moved. He knelt on the floor opposite me, his focus entirely on the map now. He studied the pattern of my red circles. His eyes tracked from one marked location to the next. I saw the exact second the pattern snapped into place for him. His dismissive frown vanished. His shoulders, that rigid line of control, slumped just a fraction. It was a small, shocking sign of defeat. He reached for his phone without looking away from the paper. He called Alina. Pull city planning permits for the last 18 months, he said, his voice all business now. Focus on nonprofits and community centers. Cross-reference everything with Crane's known fronts. He hung up and looked at me. His assessment felt clinical, but fundamentally altered. Why would he do this? I tapped the circle nearest my burned apartment. Access, I said. My voice was steady. These places get city grants. They move people and supplies freely. They have a legitimate reason to be in any neighborhood. I took a breath. They're perfect for hiding something Crane doesn't want found. Matteo stared at me, then back at the map. He didn't thank me. He simply reached out and pointed to the same circle I had just tapped. His finger landed right next to mine on the paper. We need to see what is at that center, he said. His tone left no room for argument. You are coming with me. Why his finger landed so close to mine, I wasn't going to like the answer. The map's ink left a phantom, gritty smudge on my finger that I couldn't stop rubbing. Alina's spare chair creaked under my weight. The blue light from her 3 monitors cast a sickly glow across my dusty boots. My friend worked across from me, her keyboard clacking in a steady rhythm. I gave her the pattern but not the source. These community centers are the only common thread, I said. My voice sounded tight in the small room. Her green eyes scanned the screens with fierce concentration. She pulled up permit databases, cross-referenced them with corporate filings. The dry hum of her computer tower filled the silence between my vague answers. I couldn't tell her about Mateo or the fire. I could only urge her to look. Focus on who approves the grants and the inspections, I said. The scent of stale coffee from a forgotten mug on her desk was sharp in the air. Elena's typing stopped suddenly. She leaned closer to her center screen. Her expression shifted from curiosity to cold understanding. It's one name, she said, her voice low. All the permits, all the grant oversight for these specific centers, it all goes through one city commissioner. She turned to me, her face pale in the monitor light. Alistair Vance. He's the puppet master. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I opened my mouth to tell her to stop, to wait, but her phone was already in her hand. Her thumbs flew over the screen. My own burner phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a photo of a smiling politician. Elena's text followed, he's the puppet master. Grants, permits, oversight, all his portfolio. Proof he's letting Crane use the centers as fronts. Meet me at the old Red Line Diner in 2 hours. I have everything. Before I could type a warning, a second message appeared. They're moving people, not money, people. Then nothing, I called her. It went straight to voicemail. The way he'd looked at me just then wasn't about the threat. I didn't know what to do with that. I stared at his shaking hand from the fire, now understanding it was fear for me that made it tremble, and knew that same fear was now for Elena. I put it away and got on with things. Why I couldn't warn her before her phone died refused to stay put. The metallic taste of dread from Elena's final text still coated my tongue as I tried to swallow. In the diner's graffitied gloom, the only movement was a single fly buzzing against the sticky, cracked vinyl of the seat opposite me. My own breathing sounded too loud in the abandoned space. I had disobeyed Mateo's direct order for this, and the emptiness mocked my risk. Then I saw it on the grimy floor. Elena's brown leather satchel lay on its side. A scatter of papers and a small digital recorder surrounded it. One of the recorder's buttons was cracked. A single chair was overturned nearby, its sharp metal legs pointing toward the kitchen doors. My stomach clenched into a hard, cold knot. I forced myself to slide from my booth and crouch by the evidence. I reached for the recorder with a shaking hand. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I jumped. I pulled it out and saw Mateo's name. I answered, but I couldn't speak. His voice came through, low and controlled. Where are you? I could hear the soft crunch of gravel under his shoes on his end of the line. I opened my mouth, but all that came out was a choked sound. He heard it. His next words weren't a question. They were a cold, flat statement. You went to her, alone. I finally found my voice, thin and strained. She's gone. There was a struggle. My free hand, still on the diner floor, traced the deep scuff mark a shoe had left near Elena's bag. Mateo was silent for 3 long breaths. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped. It was stripped of all its usual command. It was just a raw sound. Stay exactly where you are. Do not touch another thing. The order was there, but beneath it I heard something else. A crack. A faint, involuntary tremble in the words. He was afraid, not for himself, I knew that now. I watched my thumb, pale and still, resting on the dusty tile. I didn't know what to say. I whispered, I'm sorry, which was the wrong thing, the useless thing. The line went dead. The taste of cold, stale diner air still clung to the back of my throat. I stood frozen in the center of the safe house living room. The only sound was the frantic hum of the old refrigerator from the kitchen. The front door clicked shut behind me. I didn't turn around. Mateo's silence was a physical pressure against my back. He moved past me into the room, his tall frame a dark cutout against the gray streetlight from the window. He didn't turn on a lamp. Tell me you have her, he said. His voice was flat and quiet. I shook my head. My throat closed up. I forced the words out. They were gone. There was a struggle. Her bag was there. Everything was scattered. I heard the floorboard creak under his weight as he shifted. You went alone. It wasn't a question. It was an indictment. She was my friend. Her phone was off. I thought I could reach her first. My hands were trembling, so I shoved them into my coat pockets. He turned then. I could see the pale outline of his face in the gloom. You signed her death warrant the moment you left alone. The words weren't shouted. They were precise, surgical, and they sliced right through me. A cold numbness spread from my chest. He took a single step closer. You traded her life for your guilt. That broke the dam. A choked sob ripped from my throat. I was afraid your world would consume her, that you'd see her as a liability or a tool and she'd just disappear into the machine. The truth of it, ugly and desperate, hung between us. Mateo went completely still. All the anger seemed to drain from his posture, leaving something hollow behind. He looked down at his own hands for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was stripped bare. "You think my touch does corrupt? It does." He finally met my eyes. It just did. The space between us felt charged and terrible. I saw the raw truth in his gaze, the same devastating realization that was curdling inside me. My defiance was gone. His rage was gone. All that remained was the shared, awful understanding. He didn't reach for me. I didn't move toward him. We just stood there in the humming dark, breathing the same poisoned air. My throat ached with a raw, salted tightness from all the words I could not swallow. The sterile chill of recycled air, and the executive's sweet raised goosebumps on my arms as I stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows. Mateo stood across the vast desk from a man I knew only as Leo, the family accountant. Leo was small, with round glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He kept wiping his palms on his trousers. "The audit trail is a concrete wall, Mr. Rossi," Leo said, his voice trembling. "Commissioner Vance's office has its own security protocols. We would trigger a dozen flags." Mateo placed his hands flat on the polished desk. His silver lion ring clicked against the wood. "Flags are not my concern. Access is." "I cannot," Leo whispered, his eyes darting to me, then back to Mateo. "The legal exposure would." Mateo moved then. It wasn't the violent motion I expected. It was a simple, decisive pivot away from the man. He walked around the desk to Leo's computer. His focus was absolute, a physical force in the room. I saw the muscles in his jaw work, a tight, rhythmic clenching. He wasn't looking at me, but I saw the tension in the line of his shoulders, the way his dark hair curled slightly against his collar. It was an ordinary detail that made my chest ache. He typed commands into the keyboard with sharp, precise strokes. Leo made a small, pained sound but whispered a string of numbers and letters. A new window opened on the screen, filled with rows of data. Mateo scrolled, his eyes scanning. Then he stopped. He opened a second file, labeled Logistics Special Cargo. His reflection in the dark window glass went completely still. He scrolled down, and down again. The only sound was the hum of the air vents. His breathing changed. It became shallow, as if the air had grown thin. He leaned closer to the screen, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the desk. I took a step toward him, driven by a need to see what he saw, to share the burden of whatever was turning his rage into this silent, awful horror. I stayed because his silence was a plea I could not ignore. The cold, sick feeling from that office was still sitting in the back of my throat. I paced the safe house floor, my bare feet slapping against the unvarnished wood. The room smelled like fresh paint trying to cover old mold. Mateo stood by the window, his back to me. He hadn't moved or spoken since we walked in. He was just a statue framed by cheap nylon curtains. "You knew," I said. My voice was flat, dead. "You knew about the money fronts, the community centers, but you didn't know about the cargo." He didn't turn. I stopped pacing. "Look at me. You said I signed Alina's death warrant, but your world built the trap she walked into, your rival, your corruption." His shoulders went tight, just a minute shift against his dark shirt. His hand, resting on the sill, went perfectly still. I'd seen that stillness before. It always came right before the violence. "You want me to say it?" he asked. His voice was low, scraped raw. He finally turned. The street lamp light cut across his face, and I saw his eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying, from a furious, sleepless strain. "You want me to say I am the poison? I said it already. It changes nothing for Alina." "It changes everything for me." The words burst out too loud. I forced my hands to unclench. "Because I'm standing here with you, because I'm still trying to find her. What does that make me?" He looked at me then, a long, searching look. He opened his mouth, closed it. He looked away first. The silence stretched out way too long. The only sound was the hum of the fridge in the next room. I didn't know what to do with that silent fracture between us, so I filled it. "We have to go get her." "We don't," he said. The words were quiet, final. He pushed off from the window and walked to the small table where his phone was. He picked it up, his movements slow and deliberate. "I do. You will stay here. Silas will be outside the door." The protector's vow, absolute, suffocating. This was the violence in his protection, a cage made of good intentions. "Mateo, no." I took a step toward him. He turned, and in his eyes I saw it. The answer to what I'd heard in his stripped bare voice back at the diner. It was a cold, clear purpose, completely divorced from all his codes and oaths. He wasn't going to negotiate. He wasn't going to investigate. He was going to burn it all down. The ledger had dates, times, dock numbers, he said. Crane is moving a shipment tonight. If Alina is alive, she will be on it. I am going to that dock. He took a breath, and his next words were like a door slamming shut. You are not. Whatever came next, what I'd seen in his eyes before he turned away was the part I hadn't figured out. He walked over to the tablet on the desk. He tapped the screen awake. The special cargo document was still open. He scrolled, his jaw clenched. He's not just moving her, Mateo said, his voice hollow. He's selling her. The ledger has a buyer code, a transfer point, tonight. He looked at me, and all his defenses were gone. His expression was bare, raw. My father fought for city blocks. My grandfather fought for respect. He gestured at the tablet. This is the territory Crane has taken. My family was blind to it. We were busy measuring our own small piece of hell. He fell quiet. The space between us felt charged. Still, he was close enough that I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. I could feel the heat coming off him in the small, cold room. Neither of us moved. He looked right at me. This ledger names Vance, 2 judges, a union boss, people my family does business with. He took a slow breath. I could use it to cripple Crane, secure our position for a decade. He paused, his gaze unwavering. Or I could burn it all down. He didn't ask for my opinion on the business. His next question was quiet, and it was aimed only at me. What do you think I should do? I pushed that question aside. What I would tell him to do with the ledger? That would come back. Right now, there was only one thing that mattered. If you're going to that dock tonight, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I'm going with you. He just stared at me, and for the first time I saw something like fear in his eyes, not for himself, for me. The cold weight of that ledger was still a ghost in my hands. I stood on the rain-slicked street outside the ferry terminal, tasting salt and diesel on the damp air. The place was a dark silhouette behind a chain-link fence, with one sickly yellow lamp making a puddle on the asphalt. I turned to Mateo. He was a few feet away in the shadows, just staring at the fence. The rain had plastered his dark hair to his forehead. His hands weren't in his pockets. They hung loose at his sides, his fingers slightly curled. I knew right then he'd already decided to come. He spoke without looking at me, his voice low and flat. You have a plan for the fence. It wasn't a question. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Maintenance gate on the west side, the lock's old. He finally turned his head. The rain had caught in his eyelashes. The way he looked at me then, it wasn't about the threat. I didn't know what to do with it. He said, if I call my people, this becomes a Rossi operation. Alina becomes a piece on the board. A cold fear settled in my stomach. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, I told him. He took a slow step closer. The space between us filled with the sound of the rain. You asked me what to do with the ledger, he said, his eyes holding mine. You didn't answer. I shook my head. My own voice sounded thin. I'm not your conscience, Mateo. No, he agreed quietly. He looked back at the dark terminal. You're the reason I need one. The admission just hung there in the wet air. It was a truth he hadn't meant to share. It changed everything. He was close enough now that I could see the rapid pulse in his throat. He wasn't wearing a jacket. His shirt was soaked through, clinging to the lines of his shoulders. He didn't reach for me. He didn't move at all. We just stood there in the downpour, 2 people trapped in a silent argument. The violence he commanded was a wall between us. But in that moment, it felt like the only bridge across. I had to trust he'd use it as a shield, not a weapon. Alina is in there, I said, my words firm. I'm going in. You can help me get her out, or you can try to stop me. I forced myself to meet his gaze. But if you stop me, you become the man in that ledger. I turned and started walking toward the west side of the fence. The wet gravel crunched under my shoes. I didn't look back. I counted 10 steps before I heard his footsteps behind me. They fell in rhythm with mine. Then I heard the low sound of his voice as he pulled out his phone. The rest made sense. What he was going to do with that phone in his hand didn't. The rain still needled my skin like 1,000 cold pins as I moved through the shadows. My boots hit the metal grating of a catwalk with a hollow clang that echoed down into the cavernous space below. The warehouse air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and rust. I looked down at the main floor. Mateo and 2 of his men had a crane guard pinned against a steel pillar. One guy, Silas, held the guard's arms twisted behind his back. Mateo stood in front of him, a dark and controlled line. I couldn't hear their low words, but I saw Mateo lift his left hand. A short, sharp blade caught the dim light. My breath caught hard in my chest. Mateo's voice rose, clear and cold. "The holding cells, where are they?" The guard spat at his feet. Mateo didn't flinch. He just brought the blade's point down to rest on the back of the guard's splayed hand. The man's whole body went rigid. Mateo's own hand was perfectly steady. The clean line of his jaw was clenched tight, a muscle flickering there. That was the only sign. The rest of him was a statue made for this single, brutal purpose. My stomach turned over with a sick heat. I wanted that information more than anything. But watching him extract it this way felt like swallowing poison. "Last chance," Mateo said. His voice dropped to a tone I'd never heard. It was devoid of all warmth. It was the voice of the ledger given flesh. The guard whimpered, his eyes wide with animal fear. Mateo's thumb pressed down on the blade's spine, preparing to apply a weight that would pierce skin and tendon. This was the violence that protected his own. That carved a safe path through a corrupt world. It was the same violence that had consumed Alina. A sharp ache bloomed behind my ribs, a desperate pull toward the man and a violent push away from his method. I couldn't let him cross this line for me. I moved before I could think. My boots rang out on the metal walkway as I stepped into the weak light from a high window. "Stop," I said. The word wasn't loud, but it cut through the warehouse silence. All motion froze below. Silas looked up, his grip loosening in surprise. Mateo turned his head toward me. His eyes found mine, and the controlled rage in them blazed into something hotter, more personal. It was the fury of a command shattered. He didn't lower the blade. "Clara," he said, my name a warning and a betrayal all at once. "Go back to the entry point." I moved toward the door. Why my name sounded like a betrayal in his mouth moved with me. The pressure of his furious gaze still prickled like heat across my skin as I stumbled backward into a dark closet. My shoulder bumped the cold, humming metal of an electrical panel. The sharp smell of ozone filled the cramped space. Mateo followed me inside. He pulled the door shut behind him with a soft click that felt louder than a gunshot. The only light came from a single red indicator bulb on the panel. It painted his face in harsh, moving shadows. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at me, his hands empty now. I watched his right hand open and close slowly at his side. The guard's blood was a dark smear across his knuckles. I forced myself to meet his eyes. "You were going to cut him," I said. My voice sounded thin in that tiny room. "He knows where they're keeping people," Mateo answered, his words clipped and low. "Every second we waste, Alina is in that system. You saw the ledger." I had seen it. That cold list of names and fees. I thought of Alina's phone going silent, her satchel on the diner floor. A wave of nausea tightened my stomach. I wanted to find her so badly it was a physical pain, but I also saw the guard's terrified face. I saw Mateo's blade. "You asked me what you should do," I said. The red light gleamed on the scar above my brow. "This is the choice, right now." He took a single step forward. The closet was so small his chest almost brushed mine. I could feel the heat coming off him, and I could see the conflict raging behind his eyes. They weren't furious anymore. They were desperate. "You want me to be a different man?" he said. It wasn't a question. He pulled his phone from his pocket. He held it in his palm between us. I remembered him holding it on the warehouse walkway just before everything broke. He tapped the screen once, then handed it to me. On it was a live audio feed. I heard the guard's ragged breathing and Silas's voice, calm and relentless, asking the same questions Mateo would have. The methods would be the same. The violence would happen. Mateo had simply handed the task to someone else. He was protecting me from watching it. He was protecting his own conscience by not wielding the blade himself. But the machine kept turning. The realization was a cold stone in my chest. He watched me understand. But why my hands were so cold holding the phone he just handed me, I still had no answer for that. The ghost of Victor's grip still ached like a vice around my forearm. 3 days later, my boots crunched over gravel and broken glass outside the derelict processing plant. We were hiding in a rusted equipment shed on its roof. The air inside was thick with the smell of hot metal and old grease. Mateo stood by the single filthy window, watching the commissioner's cars leave below. He hadn't spoken to me since the terminal. I watched his back, the rigid set of his shoulders under his dark jacket. His anger was a silent force in the small space. Then his head dropped forward, just for a second. His forehead rested against the grimy windowpane. The motion was so tired, so defeated, It made my chest tighten. This was not the controlled Dawn I knew. "Why my name?" I asked the quiet. My voice was rough. "That night in the study, you said it like it was a mistake." He didn't turn. "Because it was," he said. The words were flat. "Knowing your name made you a person. A person is a problem. A person can be failed." He finally looked at me. "An asset cannot." Pushed away from the window then. He crossed the few feet between us. He stopped so close I could see the faint scar through his eyebrow and the dark hollows under his eyes. He didn't touch me. The warmth of his body was a tangible pull in the cool, dusty air. I could have lifted my hand and closed the gap. "The law failed my sister," he said. His voice was low and hollow. "I won't fail Alina." He looked at me, and his gaze held a terrible weight. "Crane's ledger didn't shock me, Clara. It was a mirror." He let out a slow breath. "This is the machine you feared. But it's the only tool I have left." We stood there for a long moment, breathing the same charged air. The unspoken thing between us was a live wire. It was the almost touch, the almost confession, the terrifying understanding that his violence was born from a protection that had arrived too late for someone else. I saw the man beneath the monster now, and that was somehow worse. Why I didn't lift my hand and close the gap. I'd been wrong to ignore it this long. The echo of Matteo's breath against my cheek still prickled my skin, a ghost in the stale air. I found myself standing rigidly beside the office door, the commissioner's low voice a grating buzz from the other side of the glass. Inside, Commissioner Shaw was a middle-aged man with a politician's smile. He shook hands with Victor Crane, whose cold blue eyes scanned the room. The guards whispered directions pointed to a steel door behind their desk. It was the only way down. Matteo moved past me to the railing. He stared at the door across the vast warehouse floor. His stillness was complete, a statue of focused intent. The faint hum of the overhead lights filled the silence between us. "The lock is electronic," Matteo said. His voice was a flat, quiet line. He pulled a pistol from his hip and attached a long, black cylinder to its barrel. He had a gun on his hip and blood on his hands. The thought was just a cold fact now. Shaw laughed loudly at something Crane said. The sound echoed off the high ceiling. Matteo raised his arm, bracing his wrist on a steel support beam. He aimed at the small, dark panel beside the distant door. I could see the tension in the corded muscle of his forearm. I watched his finger tighten on the trigger. A soft thwip cut through the air, perfectly masked by another burst of laughter from Shaw. A small spark flashed at the door panel. The heavy steel door clicked and drifted open a single, dark inch. My breath caught in my chest. Matteo lowered the pistol, his movements slow and precise. He didn't look at me, he watched the office. Shaw placed a sealed bag of documents on the desk. Crane opened it and flipped through the pages. They were planning permits. Crane nodded, then slid a briefcase across the polished wood. Shaw opened it and smiled at the contents. The transaction was complete, and it was ugly. The stairs down were a straight shot into their line of sight. I grabbed his sleeve without thinking. The wool was rough under my fingers. He stopped. He looked at my hand, then at my face. His eyes were dark, completely unreadable. "There is no other way," he said. His voice dropped so low I felt the words more than I heard them. He didn't pull his arm away. I didn't know what to do with that small surrender. I let go and nodded once. He went first, a shadow moving against the bigger shadows, and I followed. I put it away and got on with things. But what he'd seen in that briefcase, the thing that made Shaw smile, that refused to stay put. The silence after the gunshot left a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. I was already pressed against the cool glass of Crane's office window, watching the staged chaos on the warehouse floor. Victor Crane himself was turned away from me. He was watching a monitor where a digital transfer confirmation flashed a bright, satisfied green. Commissioner Vance's face on the screen looked pinched and pale. Crane's voice was a smooth murmur. He said the new permits would double their capacity within the quarter. Then a crash echoed right outside the office door. It was way too close. Crane's head snapped toward the sound. His friendly uncle face tightened into a mask of pure alarm. He ended the call with a stab of his finger. His cold blue eyes darted to the shuddering door. He didn't look at Shaw or me. He moved with a terrible purpose. He yanked open his desk drawer and pulled out a black handgun. It gleamed under the lights. Shaw, the commissioner's man, took a step back. All his earlier smugness just evaporated. He clutched the briefcase of cash to his chest. I saw his hands were trembling. My breath hitched. I looked from the gun to the door. I thought of Matteo, somewhere in the chaos below. I remembered the gentle way he'd cleaned the soot from my hands. That memory was a small, warm stone in my chest. It ached right in the middle of all that cold fear. I didn't lift a hand to stop Crane. That move was his to make. My job was to be a witness. Another impact slammed against the office door. The wood splintered around the lock. Crane raised the pistol. His knuckles were bone-white against the grip. He aimed at the center of the door. Shaw made a small, choked sound behind me. He fumbled with the briefcase latches. He popped it open just a crack. He peered inside, and his fear just vanished. A strange, relieved smile touched his lips. I knew then it wasn't just cash. It was his insurance, his ticket out. The door burst inward. Silhouetted against the warehouse glare was Matteo Rossi. His shirt was torn. His expression was pure fury. He filled the doorway. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes locked on Crane. Crane's finger tightened on the trigger. Everything else I could deal with. What Shaw had hidden in that briefcase was different. My knuckles still ached from the impact against that heavy door. I found myself crammed between humming server racks in a stifling closet, my cheek pressed against a cold bundle of cables. The monitor we'd used to spy on Crane was now a dead, black eye in the dim light. Matteo was a solid presence beside me, his shoulder pressing into mine. He held Victor Crane's briefcase flat across his knees. His hands were steady as he worked the latches. They clicked open in the silence of our little box. He lifted the lid. I expected neat stacks of cash. I saw instead a single, thick manila folder. Matteo pulled it out and opened it. He flipped through the contents under the glow of a small penlight. I saw grainy photographs of a younger Matteo, of his father, of men I didn't know, property deeds, bank statements, what looked like old police reports. My stomach twisted with a sudden, cold understanding. Matteo's face showed no surprise. His eyes just scanned each page, his jaw set in a hard line. "This isn't leverage against Vance," he said, his voice low and even. "This is a history of my family's sins. Every cut corner, every paid-off official, every buried body." He looked at me. Crane wasn't just buying a commissioner. He was buying my legacy to use as a shield. "Then burn it," I said. The words were out before I thought. My throat felt tight. "You said you could burn it all down. Start now." He didn't move. He just stared at the folder in his hands, at the proof of the world he was born into. The server fans whined in my ears. I saw the conflict in the way his thumb rubbed slowly over the edge of the paper. The cash, the gun, the scars, none of it was normal. But this careful record of corruption was the most normal thing in his life. It was his inheritance. He closed the folder. He placed it back inside the briefcase. He snapped the latches shut, one and then the other. The final clicks were decisive. He stood up, the briefcase now hanging from his hand. He looked down at me, still crouched on the floor. There was no apology in his face, only a grim acceptance. "I'm not burning it," he said. "I'm keeping it, not to use, to remember the exact cost of protection." He offered me his other hand. I took it, and he pulled me to my feet. His grip was firm and warm. He did not let go once I was standing. Why his grip didn't let go after I was standing? I wasn't going to like the answer. My knuckles ached for hours from how hard I'd gripped that microphone. By the third day, I was standing on cracked asphalt, the first sharp smell of rain cutting through diesel fumes. Elena and I were in a terminal storage room. The air tasted like dust and stale oil. She held the smuggled phone, aiming it through a filthy window at the chaos outside. Matteo and his men were a wall of violence, keeping the path to Crane's office clear. Her fingers flew over the screen, fighting to activate the livestream. The signal blinked red, then a weak green. That's when I heard the first heavy footsteps in the hall. "The signal is fighting me," Elena whispered, her voice tight. I pressed my ear to the cold metal door. Two distinct voices were getting closer, shouting about a broadcast ping. I looked back. Elena had the phone braced against the window frame. The screen showed the warehouse fight, and beyond it, the office window. Commissioner Vance's face was frozen on the monitor inside. It was a perfect, damning frame. I saw the raw determination on her face. It was the same look she had chasing a story years ago. I felt a flicker of warmth for her, quickly swallowed by dread. The door handle rattled. Once, a testing sound, then the latch shook with a violent jiggle. I threw my weight against the door, my shoulder jammed against the thin metal. "We're live," Elena said, her voice a shaky breath. A heavy thud hit the door right by my head. The metal panel buckled inward. I braced my feet and pushed back. I heard the splintering crack of wood from the frame. Elena didn't turn from the window. She kept the phone steady, broadcasting the proof. She was trusting me to be the barricade. Another crash shook the door. The pressure against my back was immense. I glanced at Matteo through the window. He was a silhouette against the firefight, firing to cover our position. His focus was absolute. Then he flinched. A round sparked off the machinery near him. His head snapped toward our room. Our eyes met for a split second across the distance. His mouth opened, but I heard no sound over the gunfire. He took a step in our direction, urgent, interrupted. The door exploded inward. The force threw me across the room. I hit the concrete floor hard. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. A large man in a security uniform filled the doorway. He grabbed for Alina. She twisted away, holding the phone high. The live stream was still active, now showing the man's enraged face. I scrambled to my feet and launched myself at his back. He was too big. He shrugged me off like I was nothing. His hand closed around Alina's wrist. He began to wrench the phone from her grip. The latch's violent splintering still echoed in my clenched jaw as I stumbled backward into the new darkness. My shoulder hit a stack of cardboard boxes, releasing a cloud of dust that coated my tongue. A single bulb flickered overhead. Alina was already moving, her back pressed to the wall beside the door we'd crashed through. Her eyes were wide, but her hands kept the phone raised, the screen still glowing with her live feed. The muffled shouts from the warehouse were a dull roar through the wall, and then Matteo stepped in front of us both. He turned his head just enough so I could see his profile. His breathing was even, controlled, but a muscle in his cheek jumped. He didn't look at me. He looked at the door. He raised his gun, his movements smooth and deliberate. I understood then. Alina had been trying to warn me. She sent me to that diner with the truth about Vance because she knew I'd tell the one person who could stop it. I'd misunderstood the danger, but her target had always been him. The thought was a cold stone in my stomach. The door burst inward. A man in a dark sweatshirt filled the frame, a pistol in his hand. He didn't have time to aim. Matteo fired twice. The sound was deafening in the small room. The man crumpled in the doorway. Another face appeared behind him. Matteo fired again. This one fell back into the hall. He didn't pause. He stepped over the threshold into the hallway, firing 2 more shots down the corridor away from us. Then he was back, pulling the door closed as best he could against the weight of the first man's body. He shoved a metal shelving unit in front of it with a grating screech. The whole act took less than 10 seconds. He turned to us. His eyes found mine first, a quick, searching glance. He saw I was unhurt. Then he looked at Alina. "Is it done?" he asked her, his voice low and rough. Alina looked at her phone screen, at the flood of comments and shares. She gave a single, sharp nod. "They have it all." Matteo nodded back. He holstered his gun. He reached out and took my hand. His palm was warm and solid around my cold fingers. He didn't say it was over. He didn't say we were safe. He simply pulled me toward a rusted metal door on the opposite side of the room. "This way," he said. That question, why his hand was so warm when mine were ice, sat there like something unfinished. The taste of the night was still in my mouth, sharp and coppery like adrenaline. But the hotel hallway was quiet. Just the hum of the air conditioner and the smell of fresh paint. The door clicked shut behind us and Matteo leaned back against it. He was a mess, torn jacket, blood dried on his face. He just stood there with his eyes closed, like if he didn't move, the world might stop spinning. I didn't say anything. I went into the bathroom and ran the tap until the water ran cold. I soaked a washcloth. The sound was too loud in all that silence. When I came back, he hadn't moved. I reached up and pressed the cloth to the cut on his brow. My fingers were careful. He didn't open his eyes, but he let out a breath, slow and deep. "I thought you were shot," he said, his voice rough. "Back at the terminal, when you pushed me, I saw the muzzle flash and I thought it hit you." He'd never said that, not once. He opened his eyes then. They were dark and they were only looking at me. We just stood there. My hand was on his face. His was at his side. The space between us was nothing. I could see his pulse in his throat. I could feel the heat coming off him in that cool, sterile room. He didn't move closer. I didn't step away. Then he lifted his own hand. He didn't touch me. He just held it there, palm up near my cheek. It was a question. The only sound was the faint buzz of the lights and the dust floating in the sun from the window. Down the hall, a door slammed shut. The sound broke the spell. I blinked. I watched the decision settle over his face, calm and final. He lowered his hand. He turned his head just enough that his mouth brushed against my palm. It wasn't a kiss. It was quieter than that. It was an answer. Real quick, if you're here for the tension, the loyalty, the moment the world falls away and it's just 2 people in a quiet hallway, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe. The best part is coming up. But that quiet didn't last. The next day smelled like smoke and bad decisions. I was in an alley, tripping over broken concrete, the chemical stink of the warehouse fire stuck in my nose. Another gunshot went off, way too close, chipping the brick right next to my head. I flinched hard and yanked Alina behind a pile of rotting crates. My own breathing was so loud it was embarrassing. Mateo's voice cut through the chaos from further down. Go, now, Clara. He was pointing to a side street. Two of Crane's guys were blocking it, and I saw it, just for a second, the fine tremor in Mateo's hand before he clenched it into a fist. He turned his back to us, putting himself between those men and where we were hiding. Alina's hand was ice cold in mine. Her face was pure fear. Stay with me, I hissed. My other hand went to my waistband. I pulled out the pistol. The cash, the gun, the scars, none of it was normal. My thumb found the safety. The weight of it felt so final. I peeked around the edge of the crate. The side street was clear. For 1 second it was clear. Victor Crane was gone. The explosion tore his place apart, but men like him, they always have a back door. The thought made me sick. Had he slipped out already? But what I'd seen in Mateo's eyes back in that hallway, right before he turned away. That look wasn't going anywhere. That was mine now. So, what's the line for you? When does protecting someone cross over into something else? When does the danger stop being a threat and start being the only place that makes sense? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to know how this ends, if the quiet wins or the chaos does, you know what to do. Smash that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.